Patrick hadn't opened his Beverly Hills gallery yet, so Celia didn't have very many opportunities to visit LA. But sometimes we actually worked in the same city at the same time. One time in London, another time in Minneapolis, back when bigger movies were still being shot in Minnesota. We made jokes about how Minnesota was the closest we'd been to Iowa City at the same time in years. We joked about that through email anyway. We never actually met up, not even for coffee, even though she was only a few miles away from me. So, as usual, I was the one who made arrangements to visit her in New York. I stopped booking hotels when I visited her, even though they were way more comfortable than her couch. I knew that if I didn't actually stay with her in the same 400 square foot space, that I simply wouldn't see her. But pretty soon, I realized that even staying with her wouldn't guarantee that I'd actually see her. So I made new arrangements. It was a pleasure to finally have a second assistant in the studio with us again, even if it was only brief and sporadic. You livened up the space in the few weeks you were able to help when you were in between movie work. We could have used a dozen Maggies for every art fair and biennial that Celia participated in. By early 2000, Celia had almost entirely set aside her major follow-up to the apartment building. Part of me suspects that Patrick was happy with this arrangement, perhaps even causing it intentionally, pushing all these demands upon her so that she could not work on the larger projects that did not sell. Though those works, of course, were the pieces that Celia wanted to be known for. No, at first, you weren't particularly helpful, no. Because you worked as a sound engineer in Hollywood, and Celia's films had always been silent. But you learned a few things that any intern might do. And I did think maybe this will allow us to leave early some nights, or at least at a reasonable hour, and perhaps I could dedicate a few hours to my own work. In the end, we only worked longer. Perhaps because you and Celia were having fun, catching up on each other's careers, your lives. I was not bothered then, no. I understood the pressure that Celia was under to meet so many demands. Having you around usually made things better. The thing that was supposed to be the most fun was when we destroyed all of those clothes in Central Park. It was absolutely pouring outside, and Vicente pulled up in his cargo van outside of the studio. And Celia was very serious, standing with me outside in the rain, telling me about how we're going to the park. I didn't think that this sounded like a very good idea. I asked her if I could go buy an umbrella quick, but she said, "Why? There's no point." So Celia got in the front seat. There weren't any back seats. I sat in the back with hundreds of shirts and jeans made for teenage boys. They were just thrown in there like Celia had just bought bags upon bags of old clothes from the Goodwill. I was surprised to dig through them to see that they were all actually brand new. It was preppy stuff that was popular then, like Abercrombie and Tommy Hilfiger. We drove up to the softball fields and parked. Vicente slid open the giant door and let the cold rain inside. So I pulled all the clothes away from the door to stop them from getting wet. But Celia said, "Don't bother." She told Vicente and me to put on a shirt and a pair of pants, but he couldn't fit into any of the pants, so he just worked on shirts, mostly the button-up ones, and a lot of those he couldn't even button up all the way. I wore these ridiculously baggy Levi's. Celia had Guess or whatever, definitely some Calvins. And then Celia told us to run around the park until the clothes were absolutely filthy. The more tears and rips, the better. I slid into home plate at a softball field and I felt the mud spray up my back. We did this all afternoon. There were so many clothes to ruin. I never laughed so hard in my life. Laughter? Oh, well, yes, I suppose I remember some laughter, but what I remember most was standing at the door of the van after maybe 3 hours of this absurdity, and it was downpouring. The rain had been intermittent all afternoon, but I remember at that moment it was raining in blinding sheets. And Celia had come up to us to go through the clothes that we'd already ruined. She held up a boy's button-up polo that I had torn at the seams merely due to my size, and she said, "This isn't right. This isn't right. Which one of you did this?" She threw the shirt at me and told me to ruin it more thoroughly. She said, "It needs to be perfect." Perfectly ruined? I looked over at you and you were standing in the rain in your bra, reaching for another boy's shirt. And you laughed, saying, "Yeah, Vicente, you really need to be better at ruining these clothes." Was I bothered? No, of course not. Not then. Celia was under so much pressure to produce. And that was a very rare afternoon where we could focus on Celia's biggest, most important project at the time. Even with that little bit of chiding, Celia was in higher spirits than usual. Though I did feel bad for you. Because Celia then turned to you and said, "Why did you put that shirt back in the van already?" Celia picked up the shirt and shoved it into your bare arms. Your skin was dotted with goosebumps, and Celia scolded you, saying, "This isn't good enough either!" And she threw up her hands, acting as if it was a much bigger issue than it really was. As if the shirt couldn't merely be dragged through the mud or run over with the van's tires, which we ended up doing with many of the shirts and jeans anyway. Then Celia pulled another one of your ruined shirts out and said, "Why the hell did you think this was good enough? We only have so much time to work out here. Do it right the first time." I saw you shudder, as if you'd just been slapped on the hand by an abusive parent. I believe your relationship, its hierarchy, and how you were suddenly placed at the bottom of it, even after we supposedly had so much fun in the park, I believe it nearly made you cry. Maybe. By the end of the day, I'd caught a cold that would keep any rational person in bed for a week. Yes, she asked me to come back into the studio anyway. No, I was not bothered then. No, it doesn't mean anything when I say then. I don't think I just said then. Did I just say I was not bothered then? When she got the bone between her teeth, she absolutely wouldn't let go.